Hey, how do you do, guys? It's Brahim here and welcome back to another video on my channel, and today we have a massive one. We're going to be predicting the entire Premier League season for 2021-22, and it's going to be very exciting because we're going to do a lot of it. We're going to do the full league table, we're going to do the sack race, top signing, and also the flop signing, or the flop of the season, I would say, and also top goal scorer, top assister. So I do not want to linger too long because I tend to, ramble on in these kind of videos, so I'm trying to keep it nice and short. I do not fancy myself as anything of a Premier League expert or anything along those lines. I'm a fan of the sport, I follow it quite closely, so I do think I have some ideas, but I'm obviously going to get some things wrong. But I would suggest you use this as a betting guide, obviously, but I don't condone betting. First things first, we're not going to go through the Premier League table just from bottom to top or top to bottom, because that's just kind of boring, and there's kind of that middle part where no one really cares who finishes where, because they're not going to get relegated, they're not going to qualify for Europe. So we're just going to start with that middle part and keep the interesting bits for later. We're going to start in the 14th position, and 14th I do believe is going to be Southampton. Now Southampton have quite an interesting season ahead, and behind them as well. Just last season they had a very tricky one. They started out very good and they were top of the table in like September or October, and then they went on an awful run, and it's quite bewildering to me that they kept a hold of their manager, Hasenhüttl, but I'm a big fan of him. It might be my Austrian bias speaking, because he's also Austrian, of course, but I think he's a very good manager. I think he's done a very good job when he was back at Leipzig. In terms of recruitment, they did sell Danny Ings, which is the big sale. They also got rid of, let me just have a look at my smart board here. They also lost Ryan Bertrand, who went on a free to Leicester. So those are quite big losses, but they did sign Adam Armstrong, who was a very good goal scorer for Blackburn in the Championship last season. So I think it's going to be a solid season for them. I don't think we're ever going to see them in the bottom three. I don't think we're ever going to see them in the top 10 for a prolonged period of time. It's just going to be a solid 14th, nothing too exciting. Next up, in 13th, we have the XG boys from Brighton. Yeah, Brighton finished, I think, 17th or 16th last season. Pretty disappointing season, and the big thing with them was always that the expected points or expected goals table showed them to finish between 5th and 9th, and once in actual fact they almost got relegated, which just kind of speaks for the fact that they don't have a good goal scorer, and that's kind of the reason why I won't put them higher, because I do think there's potential in the squad. They play very nice football, but I don't believe they'll finish higher just because they haven't addressed the issue. They haven't signed a goal scorer. Now they have a lot of players in that position who could potentially step up to the plate. Neil Maupay is probably the one you'd have to point out. But also they have lost Ben White, so I do believe it's going to be a solid season for them. I don't think they're going to get anywhere near the heights that the expected goals or points table from last year would suggest. So Brighton, 13th. Next up, in 12th position, I'm going to go with Wolves. Now this is quite an interesting one, because I don't know, is that a disappointing season if you finish 12th? Is it a good season? Is it a solid season? I'm not sure. Obviously, a managerial change, which is a big factor for me. I do think Nuno Espirito Santo is quite an underrated manager. The new guy, Bruno Lage, I think he's called. Don't know much about him, but their business this summer is quite, worrying if you ask me, because they did get rid of Rui Patricio, their goalkeeper, and whilst they did bring in Jose Sa to replace him, you just never know how that one's going to go, and Patricio was a very solid goalkeeper for them. So it'd be interesting to see how that one pans out, but I do believe they're not going to be too worried this season. Neither do I believe they'll push anywhere near towards the top half. They don't have European football, which kind of hindered them last season, and Jimenez is back from injury. But still, I just don't think. I think losing Nuno Espirito Santo is a big factor for them, and I think he's been very underrated with the job he's done with Wolves to get them into that position, finishing 7th 2 years in a row, and then a solid mid-table finish as well, whilst going far in the Europa League. So I think they dropped down the table a bit, although I think that's around where they finished last season. Another thing to point out is the loan signing of Trincao. Exciting player, could make the difference in a couple of games. I don't think he's going to be a superstar, to be honest, not this season, potentially in the future, of course. He's coming on loan from Barcelona. But yeah, Wolves in 12th. Moving on, in 11th, this is kind of a bit of a disappointing season for West Ham, I think. Just because they are in the Europa League, they did very well to qualify for that last season. But obviously a big part of their qualifying campaign was Jesse Lingard, who isn't going to be at the club this season. I think he's gone back to United and it's going to be part of their squad, which is going to be interesting to see whether he finally finds himself a home there. But yeah, obviously they don't have Lingard. They have a very thin squad. It was very thin for, let alone the Premier League and domestic football last year. And whilst they will probably just send out some kids to play in the Europa League or maybe in the Premier League, I do think all the travelling and the extra midweek fixtures are going to see them struggle a bit more. I think it's going to be a solid season, but I don't think they're going to be looking up the table for too long a time. Neither are they going to be looking down it, obviously. In 10th, we have a team where I believe it could go either way this season. They could be up in the fight for the promotion spots. They could be down in the relegation scrap. But I do think they should be solid, and I do think they'd be looking more upwards in the table. It's going to be Aston Villa. Now, Aston Villa, obviously the big one, they sold Jack Grealish for over £100 million, which is, I mean, absolutely massive money for the club. But we saw last season when Grealish was injured. We saw it in that last championship campaign. We saw it in the season before that in the Premier League. When Grealish isn't on the pitch, they struggle massively. However, they did go and spend that money. They spent it quite nicely, I do believe. They got in Danny Ings from Southampton, which is a very good goal scorer. Be interested to see whether they can fit Ollie Watkins and him into the same lineup. It would be very exciting, very attacking lineup. They do still have attacking talents in Bertrand Traore. They also have signed Leon Bailey from Bayer Leverkusen, which is, I don't believe, too good a signing. He's not the wonder kid he looked like a couple of years ago, but he's the kind of player who can make a difference in a couple of games, so that's a very good signing as well. And also they have, of course, signed Emiliano Buendia from Norwich, and that, I think, is the big factor. I think that's going to push them on very nicely, and I think he's going to be a good replacement for Jack Grealish. I don't think he's going to be as good, but it's the closest thing you can get for that kind of money, and I'm very excited to see him. And Aston Villa, solid 10th place, maybe even looking upwards in the table. Now then, finishing off this kind of mid-table bit from teams where I don't think they're going to necessarily push up towards Europe, nor going to be much in a relegation scrap this season. We go to 9th, and we got Everton in there. Now, this is quite an interesting season ahead for Everton. They didn't spend much money this summer after investing quite a lot last year with Carlo Ancelotti at the helm. Carlo Ancelotti has gone. Rafa Benitez is at the club now. And I do rate Rafa Benitez as a manager. He's very pragmatic, and football is a results business. He gets you results, not necessarily in a super unentertaining way, just not in the most entertaining way. And in terms of that transfer business, he addressed the issues in the squad. They were lacking a bit of pace on the wing. He got in Andros Townsend and Demarai Gray. And also another big thing for me is, if he does end up staying at the club, is Moise Kean is back from loan at PSG. And you wouldn't have believed it when he went out on loan there last year, but he did have a good season for Paris Saint-Germain. So I do believe he's going to, kick on, maybe play down the wing. They have DCL in the centre to get on the end of crosses. So I do believe it's going to be a good season for Everton. I don't think they're ever going to really look like, necessarily pushing into the Europa League spots, but I think they're going to be a solid upper half of the table team. Now then, before we have a look at the teams which might potentially get relegated and the teams I'm tipping to go down, we're going to have a bit of a separate category in the flop of the season and signing of the seasons. And for the flop of the season, the obvious choices are probably, the kind of big money signings, just because they have a lot to live up to. So the obvious choices would probably be Lukaku, Sancho, who do I have down here? Varane if he comes in, Kane if he does join Manchester City, although that's not looking very likely right now. Ben White for Arsenal, Leon Bailey I talked about. I don't think he's going to be as good as some people might expect, although I don't think he's necessarily going to be the flop of the season. And also we've got Adam Armstrong for Southampton. Quite a lot of pressure on him, replacing Danny Ings in there. And Milot Rashica for Norwich City. I'll get to him in a bit. But I do think the flop of the season is going to be, and this is going to be a big shout, it's going to be Jack Grealish. Now hear me out on this one. I don't believe that Jack Grealish is going to be a bad player for Manchester City and that he's not going to improve the team. But the guy costs over 100 million euros. He's everybody's darling in England, so he's going to have a bit of credit with the media. Nevertheless, he cost over 100 million pounds, euros, both, not added together, but separately. So there's quite a lot of pressure on him. When we have a quick look at our signings, which went for over 100 million pounds, you can see there that it's kind of, not many of them worked out. Actually, I would argue that all of them can be categorized as flop, with maybe the exception of Kylian Mbappe. However, his contract is running out. If he lets his contract run out and fails to win the Champions League with PSG this season, that's also going to be kind of put down as a flop, all the way down until Pogba and Bale. I do believe every single one of these signings can, until a certain degree, be classed as a flop, and many of them absolute flops in Coutinho, Griezmann. Neymar as well. I mean, the most expensive transfer in all of time, and the problem with him is not his performances. He's an insanely good footballer, and I rate him really highly, but he doesn't get on the pitch half of the year, and that's just not good enough for the kind of money you spend on him. So I do believe Jack Grealish is going to be a good signing and improve Manchester City, but I do believe he's going to be labelled as a flop nevertheless by the media, just because one mistake in the Champions League, which might cost him the game. And Jack Grealish is a player who takes risks. He wins a lot of free kicks, but maybe sometimes he just, try to take the ball on the dribble, give it up, and they concede on the counter. I do believe Jack Grealish, in a sporting sense, is not going to prove to be worth 120 million euros, 100 million pounds. I just do believe that at the end of the season, or at the end of his tenure in Manchester City, people are going to say, you shouldn't have spent that kind of money on him. I hope he proves me wrong. He's a very likable character. I like the guy a lot, and definitely hope he proves me wrong. But I do believe flop of the season is, at the end of the season, gonna be Jack Grealish. So next then we have the signing of the season. Now a lot of players we just mentioned for the flop of the season also could qualify for that one, just because they are super players that have been signed, the likes of Sancho, Lukaku, Varane. I do think they're going to improve their clubs massively, but I just think for the money they spent, you can't kind of signal them signing of the season just because they're delivering what you expect. In terms of players who I think might outperform their value or the cash money that was paid for them, you have a couple of options. You have Armstrong, of course, for Southampton, who we also mentioned in the flop of the season, could potentially work out very well. Also, you have the Salzburg boys. Enoch Mbrepu is going to join Brighton. Salzburg, obviously, my hometown club. So I'd like to point them out here. Leicester always doing very good recruitment. Signing Patson Daka from Salzburg is going to be a good player for them. Soumaré also coming in from Ligue 1. A couple of options in there. Danny Ings joining Aston Villa could be a very good signing. But the one I opted for is also Aston Villa players. So these categories in terms of signings are kind of very Aston Villa themed. The one I went for is going to be Emiliano Buendia. Talked about him when he talked about Aston Villa. I think he's going to be a very good player for them. It's a huge loss for Norwich City. It's probably the reason why they might get relegated this season, although we get onto that a bit later. And it's going to be a very good signing, create a lot of chances and goals for them. And very excited to see him play in an Aston Villa shirt next season. Okay, then next we're going to have a look at the lower parts of the table. And in 15th, I have Burnley. Now, there's a case to be made for the likes of Burnley, Newcastle. They're just very uninspiring clubs in terms of the business they do, the managers they have, and the way they play football. And there's always an argument to be had for them maybe getting relegated. I just don't think I don't think there's any warning signs there why they should be any worse than they were in previous seasons. I think they'll be solid. 15th might just be dragged into the relegation scrap, but I do think they'll be all right. They obviously still got Chris Wood up front. Not done any business outside of that, really, bringing a couple of British-based players. Nothing too exciting. But I think it's going to be, a season as always for Burnley, a bit in a relegation scrap, but probably they'll be fine at the end of it. In 16th, and this is probably the one I find the most difficult to predict this season, is going to be Crystal Palace. Now, Crystal Palace, it could go anywhere with them. Interesting club, Crystal Palace, if you ask me, because, from the outside in the last few years, they kind of seemed, very boring. Roy Hodgson, no inspiring signings, no inspiring sales, and the football not necessarily capturing the imagination. But they are always very daring in terms of the managerial signings they make. Patrick Vieira is in now. They had Frank de Boer, whom they tried beforehand, and obviously it didn't work out the first time. So no guarantee it's going to work out with Patrick Vieira this time. He's not necessarily had the best managerial pedigree. He's had good times in New York. He's had all right times in Nice, but nothing that kind of screams, as a Premier League club, you need to bring this guy in to manage you. So it will be quite interesting to see how that one pans out. It could go very, very badly and he'll be the first manager to be sacked, or it could go very well and you might just see his ideas work out very nice in the Premier League. In terms of the business they got rid of a couple of old stars of the team in Patrick Van Aanholt and also Anders Townsend, and brought in a couple of new younger centre backs to strengthen the team. So I don't think there's anything too revitalizing there, but I think they're going to be just fine, but I think it's going to be a struggle throughout the season. But at the end of the day, I think they'll comfortably finish above the drop. Now then, all this talk of Crystal Palace and their probable struggles with their new manager, or possible struggles with the new manager, gets us onto the sack race. Who do I believe is going to be the first manager to be sacked in this Premier League season? Now, a couple of options. Patrick Vieira, obviously. Mikel Arteta is kind of, a bit uncertain. I mean, he seems to be rated quite highly by the Arsenal board, but if it continues not to go up in an upwards trajectory, you never know how long they're going to stick with him. Sean Dyche is always a possibility if Burnley start out poorly. Similar thing with Ralph Hasenhüttl. But my choice is actually going to go, and that's a bit of a spoiler for who I might think is going to go relegated, is going to go to Steve Bruce. Steve Bruce for Newcastle. Once again, similar to Burnley, not very inspiring. And, he's a good Premier League manager. I really rate him, actually. And I would not be surprised if he doesn't struggle. And it's quite tough to call the first manager to be sacked, because I think there's not necessarily a club you look at this season where you think they're going to struggle, they're going to underperform. And also, except for probably the promoted clubs, are going to have it quite difficult to kind of acclimatize to the Premier League. But then probably going to stick with the managers a bit, because that's kind of the expectancy. So I do believe it's going to be Steve Bruce, but it could go any which way. So don't take my word for it. But Steve Bruce, my call for the first manager to get sacked this season. And that would lead us nicely to the bottom 4 places. So one out of these 4 teams is going to stay in the league. Newcastle, I obviously mentioned them before, is one of those 4 teams, which we're going to talk about in these bottom 4. And the other 3 are the 3 promoter clubs. I think it's going to be quite a tough season for the promoter clubs. I think we're kind of seeing that nowadays, that the discrepancy from getting promoted into the Premier League and being a mainstay in the Premier League is just so huge, because the money is just so big. And that's why I do believe all of the promoter clubs are going to struggle this season. I think we'll just take it up from bottom to top. At bottom in 20th is going to be Norwich City. And I do feel quite bad for that, because I think Norwich are, it's quite a good process building up the team. They kept faith with their manager, even though they got relegated from the Premier League a couple of seasons ago. They won the championship for the second time in 3 years. So it's a very good process. It's a very good team, but they just lost Emi Buendia, and they haven't been able to replace him. The players they have brought in don't really fill me with much confidence. Emi Buendia was involved in 32 goals last season. I think it's 17 assists and 15 goals, which is just absolutely massive. You don't get those numbers anywhere else in the championship, I don't believe. And that kind of leads me to believe that they are not going to be able to acclimatize to the Premier League nicely. I do think they're going to be, competitive and finish on a fairly high points total. I do think the relegated clubs, we saw that in recent seasons, they finished on pretty poor points totals. I do think, the 40 points mark is going to be that sweet spot again this season. I think it's going to be quite difficult to stay in the Premier League. But I do believe there's business that Norwich have done. They brought in the Bremen boys in Josh Sargent and Milot Rashica. And if you would have signed those 2 years ago, I would have been very excited. But having seen them in the last couple of seasons underperforming alongside their club, which got relegated, obviously, I would be surprised if they are much use in the Premier League. And that's why I do believe they just haven't strengthened, and they have lost a lot of quality going up a division. I don't think they're going to be able to cope. And moving up the table, in 19th, it's going to be another promoter club. It's Brentford for me. Now, Brentford, they have done good business. They've kept the hold of their stars. Ivan Toney is an incredible goal scorer, scoring 33 goals in the championship last season, which is absolutely insane. They got in Christopher Ajer from Celtic, which is a very good centre-back signing. And once again, I do believe they did very good business. They're a likable club and on a good trajectory and on a good, I do think they are on a good path, and maybe they'll get back up to the Premier League if they do indeed get relegated. I just think the discrepancy in terms of quality, because the money that other clubs have available for being in the Premier League for so long, I just don't think it's a step up that this Brentford team can take, which is quite interesting, because I think a lot of other people are predicting them to stay in the league, but they were also just the 3rd best team getting promoted from the championship last season. I just don't think it's going to be enough this year. So that leaves us with Watford and Newcastle. Which of these do I think is going to get relegated? I do believe it's going to be Newcastle, and I don't really have anything to say of why they would have gotten worse. They just definitely didn't improve in terms of the business they did this summer, and also someone's got to go. And I do believe it's not going to be Watford. Watford were, of course, 2nd best team in the championship last season. They've done some decent business this summer, bringing in Danny Rose and Josh King on a free. And the big thing for me is they didn't have any notable sales, and being comfortably the 2nd best team in the championship last season, a very good season for them. Also just recently having gotten out of the Premier League, I do think they have the quality and kind of the nouns to just have what it takes to stay in the Premier League. But obviously, with especially these 4 clubs, but also Crystal Palace and Burnley, you can throw in there. To me, it could go either which way, but my call to get relegated are going to be Newcastle, Brentford and Norwich, which is very sad, because, well, all of them to me seem like very likeable clubs. But yeah, that finishes kind of the lower half of the table. Let's get into the top bit. So then, 8th to 1st, and you might be wondering, where on earth has he put Leeds? Because Leeds you wouldn't expect to be that high up the table, surely not. Last season, a very good season after getting promoted, and I'm not going to put them in 8th actually. The other 7 teams is pretty obvious. I put them up there because the Big Six alongside Leicester, they are the best teams in England right now. There's little doubt about that. But in 8th place for me is actually going to be Arsenal. Now, Arsenal is very much, a struggling club, you'd have to say that. And it's kind of a trusting the process factor currently. They have made some good signings, I do believe, for the future in terms of Ben White joining from Brighton, Lokonga from the Belgian league, I do believe, and Tavares in from Portugal. So those are very good signings, and they are going to help them, especially in the long term. They're also going to be very useful in the short term. But I do believe they have lost some quality. The loan boys from Real Madrid have gone back to Real Madrid and not joined them again. This is Dani Ceballos and, of course, the big one, Martin Odegaard. Now, I do believe they're going to have a good team and a solid season, and you might just see a bit of a resurgence from Aubameyang after a very poor last season. I do think that is definitely a possibility. I just don't think they have anything inspiring that changed, and I don't see what is that much better than last year. What is going to push them up the table. I just think it's going to be a rather disappointing but solid season. I don't think they're ever going to look like finishing lower half of the table, nor do I believe that they're ever going to look like challenging for the Champions League spaces. And probably another season without European football is my prediction for Arsenal. In 7th, for me, then, it is going to be Leeds United. Big shout from me, I know. There's a lot of people talking maybe there's going to be second season syndrome. This is a squad mainly, being put together out of players which are, championship standard, you would have said a couple of years ago. But they have just improved so much under Marcelo Bielsa. Every single player individually, I do believe they have the standard which they showed last season. They have strengthened, signing Junior Firpo, getting Harrison on a permanent deal. A couple of kind of mainstays at the club left with Alioski, Douglas and Pablo Hernandez, but they weren't too important for the first team last season, just a bit more for the dressing room. And I just don't see a reason why they would perform any worse than last season. I think they're going to kick on a very good season and push for those European spaces. And in 7th, I do believe that would give them the Europa Conference League. It would be great to see Leeds in Europe, you'd have to say. And my call for match of the season is also going to be Leeds coach Marcelo Bielsa. In 6th, then, we have, the kind of headache club of the last few seasons. It's going to be Tottenham Hotspurs with the new manager, Nuno Espirito Santo. I mentioned it when I talked about Wolves. I rate him very, very highly. I think he's a great coach. I think he's going to improve that team, give them a solid defensive shape. And also, there's many people who kind of say that Nuno Espirito Santo's Wolves were just so good because Jimenez is so good. And you saw that last season when he got injured. But I do think that's also part of the quality of a manager, just getting a system that gets the very best out of your very best player, your striker. And obviously, Tottenham Hotspur are going to have Harry Kane up top. They also did make a couple of good signings in Bryan Gil, Rolini and Romero, which I think is going to improve them. Kind of youthening the back line, which was aging with Alderweireld going out. And I think just Nuno is going to help them kick on, kind of get back into that top 6, top 4 contention. And Harry Kane, I do believe, just on a side note, I'm pretty certain he's going to stay. I was pretty certain all the way throughout the summer, just because why would they ever sell him? There's no good reason why they would need to get rid of Harry Kane, because he has a 3-year contract at the club. He is a very professional player, so even though he didn't turn up to training that one time, or maybe that was for a longer period, didn't pay too much attention to it. But I just don't believe that Harry Kane is going to let his performance levels drop. He's going to be fine playing for the club he loves. He's grown up to love one more season, and I don't think that his value is going to drop really throughout the season unless he gets a big injury. I think he's going to be a big player for them. So then, Tottenham in 6th, and moving on, we're gonna, before we do the top 5 spaces, which is gonna be quite interesting, we're gonna go for the top assister and top goal scorer. Now, top assister, we have a couple of candidates. Obviously, last year Harry Kane won it alongside the Golden Boot, so what a season for him. You also have, the likes of Bruno Fernandes and Sancho for United. United are going to be a quite potent attacking team this season. When you look a bit lower down the table, you have Maddison for Leicester, Buendia, who I mentioned as the signing of the season for Aston Villa. But I do believe the most potent attacking team in this league is probably, once again, going to be Manchester City. And if he does stay fit, I don't think there's much doubt that Kevin De Bruyne is going to have the most assists in the league this season. So my shout for top assister, Kevin De Bruyne. And moving on to top goal scorer, we have, once again, Kane in the running, as always. We have Aubameyang, might make a comeback, I mentioned. Salah, Mane, Gundogan. If you are going to pick out a Manchester City player, it's probably going to be Gundogan, but I don't think that's quite going to be good enough. Obviously, you have Lukaku for Chelsea, Jamie Vardy for Leicester. So a lot of options. You could also look lower down the table for teams which are heavily relying on maybe one striker, maybe Dominic Calvert-Lewin or Chris Wood, for example, or the Aston Villa strikers in Watkins and Ings. A lot of possibilities, but I think there's no looking past, no matter whether he signs for Manchester City or stays at Tottenham, there's no way of looking past Harry Kane. I think he's going to have a great season once again, incredible output, and he's going to finish top goal scorer. And with that, as I'm saying, probably push the Spurs back up the table into sixth is my prediction. And moving on to the top five, I do think this year it's kind of a super obvious top four, because they have just strengthened so much. They were the top four last season, and which is the reason, sadly, that never the bridesmaid, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Leicester City for me, fifth place, and I do think they once again have done incredibly good business, incredibly good business, getting in Patson Daka from Salzburg, which is the perfect time to kind of find a replacement for Jamie Vardy, who's kind of slowly on his decline. Patson Daka is going to be fine with limited game time this season and just kind of kicking on, and hopefully one day replacing Vardy. He's a very pacey player. It's a very good signing for them. Getting in Bertrand on a free from Southampton also strengthens them on the left-hand side. So, and they didn't lose anyone important. They also got in Soumare from Ligue 1, which is also going to improve them. So very, very good signings, very good business, and I do think they're going to be a better team than they were last season. The problem is they just don't have the finances and the possibilities that the four teams above them do have, and it's kind of sad to see, because Leicester, once again, a very likeable club. I think they're kind of everybody's second team alongside Leeds at this current stage. And everybody wishes they would do well, and I would very much like to see them finally finishing in the top four after missing out just about in the last 2 seasons. I just don't think they have enough about them, just because the top four teams have strengthened so much and are such good teams. And moving on to those top four, we're obviously left with the 2 Manchester clubs, with Liverpool and the Blues from Chelsea. And it's just such a toss-up in which order they're going to finish. I do think all of these teams have got the quality to be in a title race this season, and have also got the managers to be in a title race this season. I do think there might be a possibility that we see a top four where all teams get around or over 80 points, which would be absolutely insane, because there have been seasons where that would have even been enough to get the title. I just think they're all that good, that much better than the rest of the league as well. Starting out at fourth, I'm going to go with Liverpool. I don't have much of a reason other than, well, they lost Wijnaldum. I do think Liverpool are a bit underrated nowadays, because they did have a lot of struggles last season, but that was mainly due to injuries. And it's unlikely that it's going to happen in that fashion again. And they did also make a signing in Ibrahima Konate, getting him in from Germany, to improve kind of the centre-back options, so that to ensure that doesn't happen again. But the big loss of Wijnaldum, of course. Maybe Keita is finally going to kick on and get that starting berth, but I just think they don't have the depth which is going to give them kind of the ability to really, really push on and get into those top places. But I do think, as I said, all of these four teams, I do think they're going to be in a title race until 3-4 match days to go, although I do think one team is going to be pulling ahead, but we'll get to that later. Another big signing, of course, another one from Germany you'd have to mention for Liverpool. Loris Karius is back from his loan spell. In third place, we have Chelsea. Now, Chelsea, quite interestingly, they haven't spent a single penny in the transfer window, until yesterday, that is, where they signed Romelu Lukaku for over £100 million, back at the club after being a youth player and leaving for Everton, I do believe it was. Mastering out a very good career for himself at Everton, but labelled as a bit of a flop for Manchester United, although I do believe he wasn't as bad as people made him out to be. Kind of got back on track with his 2 years at Inter, winning the Scudetto with them. An insane player, and Chelsea, of course, were so good in the second half of last season, getting Thomas Tuchel in, who are rated as a manager so very highly, and much like Liverpool, I do believe they're going to be in the title challenge, but I do believe they're just going to miss out, finishing in third. Now, second is going to be Manchester United, with a caveat. If they do not end up signing Rafael Varane, because I do believe that signing hasn't gone through yet, then I would see them as the bottom of these top four teams. Now, I don't think Rafael Varane is the player he looked like becoming 3-4 years ago, but he still is a full-time Champions League winning centre-back, and also a World Cup winning centre back, who is a very solid option, good on the ball as well. Perfect partnership with Harry Maguire, if you ask me. Maguire more stepping up, and Rafa Varane with his pace being able to kind of sweep up everything that comes in behind him. So I do believe he's going to improve them massively. They also got in Jadon Sancho. They kept the hold of Edinson Cavani. They got Jesse Lingard back in, which, if you would have said that 1 year ago, you'd have said, yeah, what's the point in that? But after that 6 months spell at West Ham, he could be a very good impact sub for them. And I do believe they're going to kick on this season. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has proved a lot of his doubters wrong. Still don't believe he's an incredibly good manager in terms of tactical nous, but I do believe he's very solid. He kind of builds a feel-good factor around the club, and he's the kind of guy you'd need to get a load of egos into one team. Big question mark is, of course, still Paul Pogba. Is he going to leave in the summer? Is he going to let his contract run out, or kind of maybe sign a new deal? I don't think that's even too important. He's not necessarily a starting player. He's a good option to start for them, which is kind of mad to say, but brings us back to the flop signings, which went for over 100 million, and Paul Pogba pretty much in that category as well. But yeah, I do believe Manchester United are going to finish in second. Also, in that title race until 3-4 match days to go, and it could go either way between these three teams, between second and fourth place. But I do believe at the end of the day, we're going to have a fairly clear title winner. As I said, I do believe it's going to come down to the last few match days, but eventually by probably like 10, 12 points, it's going to be Manchester City. Manchester City are just so good. They did have a poor start last season, still ended up finishing on like 86, 87 points, I do believe it was. They have strengthened with Jack Grealish. We talked about him. He is going to improve them, even though he might be labeled as a flop because he might, as I said, he's a risk taker in terms of in possession, so he might just have 1 or 2 moments which kind of ruin his legacy as a £100 million plus player. But I mean, they still have an incredibly good squad. They have lost Sergio Aguero, didn't really replace him with a necessary goal scorer. There is still a possibility that they could get Harry Kane in. If they do sign Harry Kane, I mean, there's lights out, no question. Manchester City is going to win this league and going to win it for the next 4 seasons as well, if you ask me. But even without him, they have so many different sources of goals, and I think that's very healthy. They don't necessarily have a player who's going to score 10, 15, 20 goals this season, but in terms of their midfield, Bernardo Silva, De Bruyne, Gundogan, also their wingers in Sterling and Mahrez are going to be popping up with loads of goals, so it's not a problem if anyone gets injured because they're just so potent. There's so many possibilities to score their goals. And I think there's going to be left no doubt that Manchester City are the best team in England, and be interesting to see how they cope in the Champions League this season. But that's for me. It's going to be the league table. Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea and Liverpool make up the top 4, followed by Leicester and Tottenham in their Europa League spaces. Then we have Leeds finishing 7th, which is very interesting. Arsenal with a disappointing season once again in 8th. Relegated for me is probably going to be Newcastle, Brentford and Norwich. And yeah, that kind of signals the end for our Premier League prediction. Let me know how you think I did. Let me maybe put your tables in the comments down below, and I will have a look back at this at the end of the season, but we'll see how I got everything terribly wrong. Obviously not, because I put so much thought into this. And yeah, I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you for the next episode and for the season prediction preview. What's it called? For the reaction for the season prediction. Very excited for that one. I'll see you then. Bye bye.